Hello, I'm Paul Beckwith. When I have a gap in videos, like don't do a video for a week or so, usually the reason is that I'm engrossed in reading, books about all different topics. Many, of course, about climate change, um, but I also, read quite a few books about human psychology, about technology, all kinds of things like that. But it always sort of with the view that, what can I apply from these other fields to the climate crisis, the abrupt climate system change that we're facing. So I'll talk primarily about this book here in today's video, but also briefly about a couple others. So this book is called War Virtually by Roberto J. Gonzalez, published in 2022. So just came to the bookstores just in the last few weeks. It's about the quest to automate conflict, militarize data, and predict the future. So, whenever there's something about predicting the future, which is what I try to do often, with how the climate crisis is unraveling, what's happening, how long will things take, I can actually learn quite a bit from, any books about sort of predictions. So that's the main topic. But I have multiple books on the go usually, and now there's usually some fiction book, and this is the fiction book I'm reading right now. Clive Cussler and Dirk Cussler, his son. It's called Arctic Drift, and this is a fascinating book. Not quite finished yet, getting there. But it's got a lot of climate change stuff in it, which is actually quite interesting. Takes place mostly in northern Canada and then the Arctic. So there's a lot of Canadian content, which I think is unusual for Clive Cussler books. It's 2008, and it's actually it's quite a good read, and there's a lot of good science in this book. So if you like fiction and you want something related to climate, I'd recommend this book. I'm not sure if you have, especially if you haven't read any Clive Cussler. It's like, very fast moving, adventure, well done. But you can learn actually quite a bit. And of course, I talked about The Ministry for the Truth, Kim Stanley Robinson's fiction book, directly pertaining to climate. So I have a fiction on the go normally, and I'm reading this book too, which I've had for a while. It's called The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson. It's a bestseller. Came out couple of years ago, I believe, or maybe just last year. Let me just have a look here. And 2020, and it's about it's about the life of Winston Churchill, and his family, and their defiance during the Blitz in World War II. Battle of Britain, Britain was in a very precarious state. Anyway, it's an excellent read, and it's really a good, it's Winston Churchill was an incredible leader. He inspired the people, and, he's the sole reason that, Britain was not, did not fall under the jackboot of Hitler. His inspiration, his will, his spirit, basically to prevail, and tremendous hardships, tremendous speeches. He really inspired the British people to avoid being overrun and invaded by Hitler. It was really touch and go. I mean, Hitler's Operation Sea Lion was getting ready to invade, within about 4 or 5 days or a week. The German Hermann Göring, leader of the Luftwaffe, said he would subjugate the RAF, Royal Air Force, in Britain in about 4 days, and tremendous amounts of fighting and so on. But the British, of course, prevailed. So anyway, so getting back to this book, War Virtually, the quest to automate conflict, militarize data, and predict the future. So just talking a little bit about it, it takes a look at an algorithmic future where new military technologies threaten democratic governance and human survival. So it's by a cultural anthropologist, and there's more and more anthropologists and sociologists and human behavior people that are working for the Department of Defense and the military to try to figure out how people respond in crisis and try to make predictions about, what threats are there in the future. It looks at autonomous weapons, weapons that work autonomously, which is without any human control. So they have a brain, if you like, artificial intelligence or, deep data analysis to make decisions without humans in the loop, robotic systems, predictive modeling software to try to predict, with a lot of input from sociologists and anthropologists, so-called soft sciences, if you like, to predict, what's going to unfold, in the future, given, different desires by different parties, etc. Advanced surveillance programs and psyops techniques, so psychological operations. These things are all transforming the nature of military conflict. Of course, high-tech underpins all contemporary military operations, and the cultural assumptions are built on. So there's different chapters on automated battlefield robotics, social sciences involvement in experimental defense research, the blurred line between political consulting and propaganda in the internet era, military's use of big data to craft new counterinsurgency methods based on predicting conflict. So, basically, it's no surprise to people that the Pentagon and U.S. intelligence agencies, the Department of Defense, have quietly joined forces with big tech, raising an alarming prospect that someday Google, Amazon, and other Silicon Valley firms might merge with some of the world's biggest defense contractors. Okay, so that's the premise. So, I'll just talk about some of the specific passages in the book. Military planners and policymakers are attempting to harness the latest scientific and technological knowledge to prepare for war virtually. People talk about virtual wars being, the idea of someday wars may be conducted without soldiers, without physical battlegrounds, or maybe even without death is saying. That's kind of utopia to think of it that way. Okay, so, that's the gist of the book. Let's have a look at things. So basically, what happened with smartphones being introduced, beginning in about 2007. Okay, that's the trend that has completely changed society. People having handheld computers, basically, that can give them access to the web all of the time, and the ability to film and photograph at a moment's notice. Everybody's carrying this. Also the GPS technology, the ability to do live feeds and to broadcast stuff to the world real time. It changes everything. It has changed everything. In 2019, American smartphone users were spending an average of more than 3 hours a day on their mobile devices. And that's apart from the time spent on desktop or laptop computers. And so these devices track people's locations, reveal their feelings, their innermost feelings and thoughts. And if this data, which it is collected by a group, then they can examine, analyze the data, and, for example, rig elections. So, we know about the Cambridge Analytica work, which looked at Facebook data from numerous users and allowed micro messaging to be sent to these people to assist in getting Trump elected in the previous, back in 2016, I guess, and was also used significantly by third parties by Russia and China, for example, to sway public opinion on things. And so basically everything is a totally new ball game, if you like, with smartphones. The ability to collect information on people and micro message based on their proclivities, their views, etc., makes it a completely different world. Now, with automated data, with any scientific research and technologies, there's a dual-use nature of these things, right? It's like things can be, theoretical developments are transformed into commercial products or military applications. Often it can become a military application first, like GPS or the original internet, the DARPANet, for example, to connect universities, etc. And of course, then the commercial products came from that, the internet or GPS, accurate GPS are just a couple examples. Or it can go the other way. Commercial products can be developed, and then these can be weaponized, if you like, and put into military applications. Also, often at much cheaper costs for the military. If the military's developing a one-of type system, an example comes to mind, controllers for ships or submarines, and you can pay tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a controller, or you can use like a Game Pro or something to run all the features on the submarine or ship. So do it for dirt cheap, right? So it goes both ways. There's always this duality. And people say that technology is neutral, but that's really, I don't think that's really the case. And in terms of predictions, there's tremendous amounts of money going into military, Department of Defense, the different advanced research networks to try to predict or figure out what's going to happen. One application commercially of this is that there's software that police forces are trialing to try to predict crimes before they happen. So they, for example, look at a city, look at particular regions, streets within a city, look at the people living in those areas. Every piece of information is collected. For example, temperature and humidity may have an effect on crime. Everything's collected, and then they try to anticipate, have the software spew out that this crime is going to happen at a certain time. So this is a sort of things that they're trying, with predictive policing software. Now, of course, policing is completely different than it was, say, 10 or 20 years ago, because the military, when the military has surplus equipment that they're phasing out, instead of it being destroyed, it basically is given for free to police forces that request it. So there's becoming less and less distinction between police forces and the military. You see a bunch of policemen standing in front of, what looks like a military vehicle, and they look like soldiers. They don't look like policemen. They're in, so for example, example in the book is that Ferguson, Missouri, in 2014, the killing of Michael Brown, an African-American teenager shot by a white officer. There were riots, and the police put on their military gear and had their military equipment and confronted the protesters back then. So this is happening more and more often. So software to predict the nature of crimes. Now, in terms of some examples of robotic and autonomous systems under development by U.S. military contract firms, okay, there's a great table in the book. For example, and I'll give you some examples. And there's lots of companies in this field which you will not have heard of, unless you're, the most part, unless you're right in that field. So, for example, Mesa Robotics, working on ACER, they love acronyms, Armored Combat Engineer Robot. So a robot for handling and removing hazardous materials, clearing routes, and decontaminating ground surfaces. BEAR, B-E-A-R, Battlefield Extraction Assist Robot by Vecna Robotics, removing wounded soldiers from battlefields. Okay, so a robot being developed just to remove a wounded soldier. But of course, if all of the fighting is from machines, I guess this would be removing wounded robots from battlefields, perhaps. Dragon Runner by Automatica Kinetic Q, collecting intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance information, detecting and neutralizing explosives. Indigo 3, Lockheed Martin, conducting aerial intelligence and surveillance missions. Something called the iRobot Warrior by iRobot is the company, disposing of unexploded ordnance, clearing routes, and in modified form, firing combat weapons. So robots firing combat weapons. We've already had some assassinations globally done completely by robotics. I'm not talking about predator drones. I'm talking about a robot which fired weapons at a car, assassinating somebody. I remember that not too long ago. Of course, there's the Boston Dynamics. That might be one that you've heard of, a company, the LS3 or Big Dog, Legged Squad Support System. So basically a four-legged robot, like a big dog or mule, and this is to carry gear over rough terrain using quadrupedal system, robotic pack mule, if you like. MarkBot, multifunction agile remote-controlled robot by Mesa Robotics, searching for IEDs, providing surveillance support. Here's one, Matilda, by conducting ground intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, detecting and neutralizing explosives. Of course, the General Atomics, the MQ-1 Predator or the MQ-9 Reaper for conducting aerial intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, also launching air-to-ground missiles. And many thousands of people have been killed by these in various countries, deaths from above, especially during the Obama presidency, but then carried over to Trump. The Mule, multifunction utility logistics and equipment vehicle by Boeing, supporting ground combat missions in rough terrain using unmanned autonomous technologies. I'll just go through a few more. Not just robotics on ground, but the Orca, extra-large unmanned underwater vehicle by Lockheed Martin, delivering supplies and armaments to naval vessels using autonomous guidance systems. The PSKT, Power Structure Toolkit by SOAR Technology, simulating human network dynamics and projecting future behavior, so trying to tell the future. Argator, patrolling perimeters, carrying supplies using autonomous unmanned guidance. Here's one, robo-lobster. Locating underwater mines, conducting underwater surveillance, search and rescue missions. SUGV, small unmanned ground vehicle, carrying out ground intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And Talon, providing intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, disarming explosives, firing combat weapons. So all of these things are there. Now, there's a lot of mistrust on autonomous and robotic systems by people in the military, for very good reason, I guess. They think they're all going to lose their jobs, right? So, they're against, quite often against the robotics, there's the Predator drones I've talked about, and the Patriot missile systems, and there's more and more automation in all of these systems. And here's a quote: "Technology can occasionally give you a false sense of security, that you can see everything, that you can hear everything, that you know everything. Even if the technology works flawlessly, overconfidence in automated or autonomous systems can warp human decision-making processes," right? There's still the so-called fog of war that is, always prevalent, even if you have automated systems. There's different groups in the U.S. There's numerous groups. There was a new one formed in 2015, the DIUX, Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, and then that was changed to DIU, Defense Innovation Unit, after a few years. And it's occupying the grounds of Ames Research Center, the largest of NASA's 10 field research sites, and Moffett Field in California. So it's right near, the high-tech companies, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, etc. And the U.S. Government has actually set up offices, because of the sort of concentration in Washington, D.C., the Pentagon, Department of Defense. They want to work closer to Silicon Valley places, so they have offices embedded right nearby. So the Pentagon, we're talking about having offices being very, very close to Google, to Amazon, to LinkedIn, Microsoft, Silicon Valley campus, etc. Apple's 5 miles away, right? So they're literally, the Pentagon set up an office that's literally at the intersection of big tech and big defense, okay, to get more technology transfer from one to the other. And what else can I talk about? There's a recent project by the Pentagon. It's a $10 billion cloud computing platform contract called the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure, or JEDI. And the idea of JEDI is to modernize the Defense Department's data systems. It was winner take all. I believe Microsoft, won that contract completely. So there's, now let's talk a little bit, there's a whole chapter in the book called The Dark Arts. So the philosopher and historian Michel Foucault once noted that politics is the continuation of war by other means. Now, going back much further, there was a Clausewitz or something said that war is a continuation of politics by other means. So it was reversed. So there's, the military has always been involved in something called psyops, or psychological operations, and the goal is to influence enemies or foreign populations in support of one's own military or political objectives. So it's to basically spread information, propaganda, etc., to bend a country's population to your will. But this is also being done to domestic audiences, and just have to remind you of the success of Cambridge Analytica, and the using the Facebook data with different algorithms to basically control or tip the results of elections over. Okay, lots of psyops and propaganda stuff in recent wars like Afghanistan. Lots going on in Russia, of course. There's a picture of a helicopter, a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter dropping thousands of leaflets over an Afghan village, as part of a psyops operation. But now it's done more on social media, Twitter feeds, Facebook tabs, Google alerts, and more. So this is the 21st century's version of propaganda, aimed at spreading disinformation and sowing ignorance, division, doubt, and fear, thereby allowing military and intelligence operations an opportunity to divide and conquer foreign populations, and enabling ordinary citizens and entrepreneurs to create homegrown propaganda. Okay, so there's a lot of issues over this, lots of books and stuff. There's a whole section on the 2016 U.S. presidential election, about this company, Cambridge Analytica, which played a pivotal role in Donald Trump's surprise victory. So this company formulated novel algorithmic techniques to influence the American electorate during the final stages of the campaign. The company, with its eclectic team of young researchers, an amalgamation of social scientists, marketing specialists, and data analysts, claimed to have generated personality profiles of millions of individual voters, and then used these profiles to send targeted political advertisements designed to exploit their psychological vulnerabilities. So, weaponized AI. And when it all came out, the company went down, filed for bankruptcy, and then restarted probably as another company. This stuff is all, going on. The data of an estimated 90 million Facebook users was used by Cambridge Analytica. 90 million Facebook users. So it wouldn't just the firm's marketing materials. Claimed that they collected up to 5,000 data points on over 220 million Americans to predict the behavior of like-minded people, and then so basically scouring individual voters' Facebook likes, retweets, and other bits of data gleaned from social media that were then combined with commercially available personal information such as property records, shopping data, land registries, magazine subscriptions, and other information sold by data brokers such as Axiom and Experian. And then they use this to generate messaging back to people to sway their views. And there's a book by, the whistleblower was Christopher Wiley, who was Cambridge Analytica's director of research, and in 2019 he wrote a memoir and detailed all of his work. And I haven't read that yet, but I'll have to get that. So lots of this has been going on. And, if you look at the massive size of the, U.S. military departments and the massive amounts of funding. I've talked about it's $700 billion per year of funding, and if we wanted to solve or make a big dent in the climate crisis, try to stabilize climate, convert everything extremely quickly into renewable energies, perhaps nuclear, completely phase out fossil fuel, get rid of subsidies. We have the knowledge and know-how and money in the U.S. Defense Department alone, $700 billion. Get all those scientists and engineers and sociologists, everybody, rowing in the same direction to address the climate system collapse. We could certainly make a big dent in it. I've often talked about that. How many ways do you need to be able to kill people? How many more weapons do you need to develop? Let's see, just talk about a few other things here. So one of the things that, when you have computer scientists working with mathematicians, and sociologists, the idea is to create a social radar capable of detecting political instability at home and abroad. Okay, so this basic idea, or precognition or precogs or predicting the future. The idea is that if you have a device that can aggregate enough real-time data from radio, television, newspapers, websites, cell phones, social media, and other sources, you might be able to accurately foresee conflicts ranging from protests to ethnic violence to insurgency and war. So by synthesizing vast amounts of political, economic, sociocultural, personal, and biometric data from around the world, those developing the technology hope to detect changing trends in population perceptions and to forecast who will cluster with whom in a network, where and when, and what kinds of relationships. So basically, see into the hearts and minds of people, understand people better than they understand themselves. So, it's sort of like a social radar, predictive modeling concept popularized by the U.S. Air Force's chief scientist, and so you have all these different layers and you use it to try to predict, it's try to predict what's going to happen. It's a social radar. So that's the idea. And the pursuit of this is in multiple Pentagon offices, including the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, the Office of Naval Research, the Combating Terrorism Technical Support Office, the Army Research Laboratory, and the Office of the Secretary of Defense's Human Social Culture Behavior Modeling Program. There's all of these different departments. They typically have always relied on the expertise of mathematicians, engineers, computer scientists, but now they're using linguists, intelligence analysts, and a range of social scientists, including psychologists, political scientists, sociologists, economists, and anthropologists. So they work with people, to get more subject matter experts from the social sciences. So that's the big shift, in the last few decades, to look at, weaponizing culture, if you like. And some of now to predict the future, there's a whole bunch of different companies that are trying to do this. So U.S. Department of Defense Predictive Modeling and Simulation Programs, a partial list. So here we go. Aardvark, adaptive agents for real-time data-driven visualization and analysis for relevant knowledge. So the developer is Aptima, and the description is agent-based visualizations for operational planning and effects assessment. So agents-based, the idea is that you look at the behavior on the smallest granular level, the behavior of individuals. And if you collect the behavior on enough individuals, you can aggregate it into seeing the idea is you can aggravate it and you can actually see how the society or country or decisions are being made. So that's the idea. So there's Aspen, agent-based system produced emergent network. So if you look at reams of data, you can try to look for patterns that are coming out of the data, emerging. Social media analysis and influence operations support tool. CAD-SIM, modeling and simulation for military COA, which stands for courses of action, potential futures. So trying to predict, unrest and destabilization. And, I can tell you that with abrupt climate change, this is happening to more and more countries, not at the same time. There's different levels of resilience within countries, across the world for different countries and actually for even regions within countries. CAMP4, cultural agent model to predict inhabitant opinion reaction. So the simulation of cultural dynamics to gauge the effects of special operations forces on public opinion. Cross-cultural awareness tool, modeling behavioral cognitive competence of military personnel in cross-cultural settings. Dignity track, framework for analyzing the dignity as a key variable associated with people's strong emotional and behavioral responses to events. So, for example, why did the Arab Spring arise? It's pretty obvious when people can't afford to, buy food that, they're out on the streets, etc. EMEME, the epidemiological modeling of the evolution of messages. What makes things go viral? So this software, it tracks and models flows of social media and messages using epidemiological modeling. IRIS, ethnic conflict, repression, and social strife, simulates population dynamics, including social conflict. Face-to-Face is a program, three-dimensional simulated scenarios for recognition of insider threats, cultural competency, etc. And there's more and more and more. I'll just select a few of these others. Guards, goal-driven users and agents for recognition, discovery, and synthesis of knowledge. These acronyms are just insane. This is a program that analyzes large-scale data sets for intelligence analysis. Mamba to predict, predictive analytics tool for military commanders. Rambo, here's one. Real-time analysis of motivations and behaviors for operations. Tools for visual analytics, an intelligent dashboard to help visualize multi-source information. And, SCARE, spatio-cultural abductive reasoning engine for predicting attacks, location of high-value targets using geospatial and cultural analysis. And it just goes on and on and on. Things for monitoring, assessing, and forecasting international crises, right? Just goes, there's huge numbers of programs that are looking at all of this stuff. And, I talked about the trying to predict crimes. So just want to give you a quote here. Criminal offenders are essentially hunter-gatherers. They forage for opportunities to commit crimes. The behaviors that a hunter-gatherer uses to choose a wildebeest versus a gazelle are the same calculations a criminal uses to choose a Honda versus a Lexus. An insurgent who wants to place an IED in a particular location will make the same kind of calculation that a car thief will use in choosing which car to steal. Okay, so those are the ideas of using past data and looking at locations to predict crimes ahead. The National Security Agency built a $1.5 billion Utah data center to process massive amounts of information it gathers from surveillance activities. Okay, massive amounts. There was a lot of that done in the Iraq conflict. Big, huge programs. This one was called Nexus 7, which tried to figure out, get all the information of people in Iraq and try to determine, what was happening there. So, techno-optimism fits comfortably alongside militarization in America today. It's the idea that scientific and technical innovations will eventually resolve complex social, economic, and environmental problems. Okay, this book goes into tremendous detail about trying to predict the future and stuff, but it never mentions climate, essentially. So it mentioned here, environmental problems. Those who place the most faith in technology's ability to redeem our world often make as gods, basically, entrepreneurial inventors and celebrity scientists. So in the U.S., techno-optimism and militarization are often intertwined with American exceptionalism, a deeply rooted belief that the country is fundamentally different from and superior to others and inherently virtuous. Well, this image has basically disappeared, right? It talks about the book talks about the communication that occurred prior to the riots in Washington on January 6, 2021. Lighting the match. What are the tipping points that occur to trigger certain events? There's a point that modern warfare makes it extraordinarily difficult for most Americans to fully comprehend its human cost. Virtual warfare makes it virtually impossible. Just sitting in a trailer in the Nevada desert and pressing a button to fire missiles from Predator drones to kill somebody, many thousands of feet below, completely out of the blue. Now, there's a quote here from the late Howard Zinn, and he wrote this book, A People's History of the United States, and he says, in order to get change, and not let technology run amok, you do things again and again and nothing happens. You have to do things. You have to light that match, not knowing how often it's going to sputter and go out and at what point it's going to take hold. Things take a long time. It requires patience, but not a passive patience, the patience of activism. We should be encouraged by historical examples of social change, by how surprising changes take place suddenly when you least expect it, not because of a miracle from on high, but because people have labored patiently for a long time. So he talks about social tipping points. He talks about abolitionists. Examples are abolitionists working for decades to end the peculiar institution, in quotes, of slavery. India's independence movement stretched out over the course of nearly a century. Women's suffrage occurred only after generations of activists filed court cases, pressured politicians, and protested. The end of South African apartheid didn't happen overnight. The American Civil Rights Movement took many years to come to fruition. Recent events show that it's all still a work in progress. It is. We can't take our democracy for granted. And we don't have to have the futures that we don't have to have a future where this automation is carried out as like this is not this is sort of trends. The book's talking about trends. It's not saying things aren't set in stone as to where we'll end up. But data-driven warfare is part of a much larger effort that seeks to protect the warfighter. Okay, this is rhetorically, right? The politics of military protection in the U.S. today dictate and drive a massive research and development regime designed to prevent U.S. soldiers from suffering any casualties or injury, at least in theory. And then it says, in an era of increasingly lethal weapons, we are somehow to believe that our soldiers will not suffer trauma or die in combat. Okay, so, let's do some other things here. I'm getting to the end here of what I want to talk about. Okay, I'm not sure why I had a note on this page. Okay, and again, this all started with smartphones, right? The ability to collect information on people. Let's just keep going. There's a couple of very crucial points that I want to get to, and I have to find them here. Drones, and here we go, I think. Okay, so in the early 1960s, there were 5-factor traits. The big 5, OCEAN is the acronym. The N is like basically they try to look at personality traits. What makes up people? Why do we do things the way we do? And how can you dissect somebody's personality to try to predict what they're going to do? So there's a whole lot of work being on that sort of thing. And of course, the Cambridge Analytica, they claimed that on the basis of 68 Facebook likes, they claimed to be able to predict a user's skin color, sexual orientation, and political party affiliation. So basically, they created a predictive personality instrument from people's Facebook pages and who their Facebook friends were and the networks, etc. And basically, back in 2012, Facebook famously engaged in an experiment to manipulate the moods of its users by means of its news feed feature. Okay, so they tried to make everybody happy, make everybody sad, basically manipulate the moods of people. And of course, people had no idea what was going on. Okay, I'm coming to the very end here. And of course, there have been famous people being very concerned about the way that AI is proceeding. So the late Stephen Hawking, an internationally renowned physicist, sounded alarm bells in 2014. He said the threat of autonomous weapons was, the biggest threat to humanity. Elon Musk warned we should be careful about AI. With AI, we are summoning the demon. Okay, he said this in 2014. Clive Sinclair told the BBC in 2015, once you start to make machines that are rivaling and surpassing humans with intelligence, it's going to be very difficult for us to survive. Okay, perhaps the most influential movement to stop autonomous weapon systems is the campaign to stop killer robots, an international coalition of scientists and NGOs opposed to this system. Okay, an anthropologist, Andrew Bickford, 2020, reminds us, whether through war magic or technology, those concerned with warfare and violence have tried to devise ways to make their soldiers or warriors better than their enemies, or at least make their soldiers or warriors think they are better armed and armored than their enemies. Just as mythology and folklore bring us tales of men and women made seemingly invincible through the application of magic or enchantment, the U.S. military also trades in ideas and portrayals of the mythic warrior, the idea of the mythic warrior or the super warrior, if you like. And you can go back and think, even World War II, the methamphetamine, the drug use among German soldiers. Most of the people, when the Blitzkrieg was going on, and the German tanks were crossing Europe, they would run for 3 or 4 days without stopping for rest, etc. And the pharmaceuticals played a big role in that sort of thing. Okay, so yeah, I can't find the quote. So anyway, it's all in here. Highly recommend reading it. You look at all of the work and all of the companies that are trying to predict the future for conflicts. And, it's funny. I think if you just look at the way the climate is changing, and figure out how different regions are impacted, where there'll be droughts, when there'll be global food shortages, etc. Just having a basic understanding of the climate system, what the jet streams are doing, how the system is changing, how the Arctic affects it, how the rise of methane, being released from the polar regions affects it, all of these different things. I think, though, that is the way to figure out what is going to happen. You can combine all of these different models and stuff, but if you don't understand how the climate is changing, then you can throw all of this research and stuff that the military is doing out the window. I think that's the main emphasis of, what I'm talking about. And if you look at, I mentioned the $700 billion defense budget in the U.S., something like 20% or more of all of the scientists and engineers, in the country are working on defense-related projects. I mean, that is a huge number of people. The Department of Defense is the largest employer in the country. And I joke to people, I say, we could do away with the IRS. Like, come tax time, people just should send off a check to the Department of Defense. I mean, that's the way it's becoming, right? So, so what's happening? So here we are, our climate system is completely unraveling. It's going berserk, it's going haywire. We're going to have global food shortages soon. And I read an entire book on automated conflict, militarizing data, sociologists trying to predict the future of conflicts and stuff. And there's almost, I would say there's almost nothing on climate change in this entire book. So, it's just like, it's like banging your head against the wall a couple times. It's a real head scratcher to me. So anyway, thank you for listening. And, it's a book I highly recommend. Okay, bye for now.